bigger building to work out of, thankfully. And so it's now 13,000 square feet, and there are currently 5 permanent employees. There is a director, a receptionist, and right now 3 full-time techs, which includes me. And this building was built in '92, and we now house roughly 10 projects at a time. So we've gathered projects through the years. Some have dropped and we've gained new ones. So before I go too much further, let me explain biological control a little more. More and more people are now familiar with it. It's really very, it's kind of a simple process in a way, because it's just using the natural enemies of pest species to control the spread of that pest. So for example, ladybirds eating aphids is a form of biocontrol. But we in particular work with primarily non-native weed species. So a lot of the weeds you've already talked about today, we work with a handful of those, and I'll go through the different weeds we do work with. And I want to make sure I mention that this is a form of integrated pest management. So biocontrols a lot of times used in congruence with maybe spot spraying, for instance, or mechanical removal. So this is just one tool in your tool belt. It's usually never the silver bullet. When we hear people say, oh, I released these insects and 1 year later, all my weeds were gone. That's usually not whatever happens. So that tends to be too good to be true. These are long-term controls. They take a minimum of 2 to 3 years to begin to control a weed population. And primarily they just ensure that that weed does not spread further than it already has. It is useful when you cannot spray an area, when there are regulations in place and you cannot spray or you prefer not to spray. This is a very useful tool. And when these insects establish properly, it's really cost effective, because the ultimate goal is that they will return year after year after year. And so you'll stabilize that weed from spreading more, and you will have the insect throughout your property. But of course you will still have some of the weed, but at manageable levels, where you can then go in with other tactics like pulling or spraying, or you can just know that you don't have so much of that weed that it's a problem as much as when you started. So let me give some actual examples. So we talked a little bit about the Mac wasp, which helps the peach farmers in Palisade, and these are still released to this day. Unfortunately, they will not establish in Palisade. It's too cold. So this is what we consider an augmented control, and about 1.5 million of these are released every summer to the peach farmers. So to this day, we do rear them at the insectary and release them every summer. And that entails quite a bit of work. We have a lot of seasonal staff that come in for the summer to help us. We are able to rear this particular insect agent on a closely related moth to the Oriental fruit moth. So we do use an alternate host to rear them, and we can rear that alternate host, the tuber moth, in trays of potatoes, which is strange but true. It works. And so we are able to rear millions of these wasps and release them each summer. And we do check, before I go to the next slide, we do always check in sticky traps that we still are keeping manageable levels of the moth, so that we know that that insect agent is effective out there. And next I'll talk about tamarisk biocontrol. This is one of those star species of the biocontrol world because you probably all noticed brown defoliated tamarisk at some point along a river in Colorado, hopefully. It's not always the case. We haven't had as much success in eastern Colorado. Tamarisk beetles don't seem to do as well there, unfortunately. But we are doing quite well in western Colorado. So we've seen a lot of tamarisk beetles and many years of defoliation. They were first released in 2005 there, and since they have spread well and are on a tamarisk tree near you, hopefully. So here is a slide showing the stages, and it's really the larval stage that does the most defoliation. So that's when the leaves are completely eaten from the tree. And if you have that occur over a couple consecutive years, you can see significant dieback. So these really have been proven effective in controlling further spread and even producing tree mortality in a lot of cases. So this is an example of the different species of tamarisk beetle that have been released in North America. This also gives you a look at their native range, where they came from, and we primarily work with the Fukang carinulata, or the northern tamarisk beetle. So if you see any in the area, especially down here on any of the drainages, it would be the northern tamarisk beetle. And we do measure these insects to ensure that they are effective and that their impact is, I guess we want to know the patterns of their impact. So we do currently know how well they've worked over many years. And we know that because we measure their damage to the canopy of tamarisk, the height and widths of the green canopy, and rough percent flowers of trees, dead branches per tree, and a rough approximation of adults and larvae per tree. And here's just a look at some of the sites we've measured. There are a couple really nice sites on the Dolores River near Bedrock and Gateway, which, even though they're very scenic areas in the middle of summer, they're not so enjoyable to measure. But here's another slide of Salt Creek in Mesa County, and we've had great success there, and they continue to defoliate thousands of acres. So you can see those bottom slides on West Salt Creek really demonstrate every year they've returned, even if some years they do come back in smaller numbers. Here is a slide of the sites we've measured, and there are currently 19, though I will mention our Eastern Colorado sites are not as successful, unfortunately. And this just demonstrates the percent of decrease of the canopy that we've seen through time. So just to prove that, yeah, through time, they really have helped push back the canopy, which in turn leads to dieback of the tree. And I guess the main good thing to see here is that Rattlesnake Gulch site on the top right of the plot actually was never defoliated until the end of 2018, and it actually, the canopy volume doubled. So without beetles, it basically doubled. With beetles, we saw roughly 50% less canopy through time. And here is a look at dieback, which at the moment it averages around 57%. This is looking at 6 sites with consecutive defoliations. So that's highly significant. And that's just another recap, but I think I better keep moving because there's some other projects to cover, and I'm probably going too slow. So anyway, we continue to measure those beetles, and they've done well. And we're also looking at vegetative understory to see some return there. And we have noted that we haven't in particular, but scientists have noted that there is a return to groundwater once tamarisk is controlled this way. And next I'll talk about field bindweed. This is a list C weed, so it's, you know, maybe not as important to control as some of the others, but we still get many requests from farmers, landowners that want help with this plant. And we have a microscopic mite that actually has been quite successful in helping slow the spread of field bindweed once they establish. The trick is getting them to return year after year. But once you have that, you will begin to see plants that look like this. The leaves will fold, the back of the stem will swell up, and those microscopic mites are living in the tissue of the plant. And this can eventually result in plant death and really help to control how much flowering and seeding you're going to get, and actually naturalize it in an area so it's not so invasive. So I would say they're a good tactic to use, especially if you tried other means. And we've made around 900 releases of these this year, so they're pretty popular here in Colorado. Hopefully they do okay through that sudden freeze we had last week. I guess that was actually this week. Whoa, okay. So next, puncture vine. I'll just mention we have weevils that help with puncture vine. We have a cold hardy strain that has established here in Colorado, and these are harder to get a hold of. We have a really long list, and they're in high demand, so it's hard for us to get enough of these. But once we do ship them out like our other agents. We also work with diffuse and spotted knapweed, and these two are the less vicious of the knapweeds as compared to Russian knapweed, for sure here in Colorado. We use a couple different weevils, and I will say that the diffuse knapweed weevil is really, really great. They work well. So if you're having problems with diffuse, that's a good recommendation. The spotted knapweed control they haven't been shown to be quite as successful, but they're another good tool. They live in the root of the plant. And finally, I will just touch on Russian knapweed. That's one of our nastiest weeds, and really probably one of the nastier weeds in the country. And unfortunately, our biocontrols here haven't been proven to be quite as helpful. We have a couple gall makers, so I'll skip ahead. You guys know how bad it is, so let me just focus on the insects. We have a fly, and it's a gall maker. But gall makers, in this case, aren't definitely not a silver bullet. They don't kill the plant. They will just reduce flowering and seeding and result in the plant being less vigorous, but as you know, it can spread vegetatively. So we wish we had more agents to release on this one. That's a look at how many counties we have released the flies. So if you do see galls like this on the tip of the stem, that is from the fly. We're currently also working with a wasp, and these seem to work a lot better in dry areas, which is a good thing because a lot of times that's where knapweed's really prevalent. So we're more hopeful for this little guy, these wasps, but they also are gall makers. They're not attacking the root, they're not eating the leaves necessarily, they're just in the stem. So they will starve the plant of nutrients, but don't result in plant death that we've seen. But we're still working our best to get them out there and get them to the public and spread them through the state. Musk Thistle isn't so bad to deal with. It's biennial, and it can be controlled with even just cutting and removing year after year. But if you are inundated with it and you don't want to spray, we do provide weevils, which Bonnie helped me look for this summer. I visited the Cortez area to actually track down some of these, and luckily I was able to get enough this year to get to everyone, thankfully, but it was a hard search. But in certain cases, these have really helped. And so we continue to get a lot of demand for these weevils. Here's a look at Cherry Creek State Park after a period of about 3 years. And you can see the difference for sure. So again, they're not eradicating, but they're controlling that weed and really resulting in a little leg up on the native vegetation there. So that's a good thing. Canada thistle, hard to deal with, very, very hard to deal with. Perennial nasty weed. Yeah, I think this is up by Steamboat. But yeah, it's a really vicious one. And we're working with a fungus to attack this weed. And it's slow to move. So our goal is to move it through the state better and get it out to landowners and anyone interested. It has a little bit of a funky life cycle that we've had to kind of work with a researcher from, shoot, I'm blanking on where he's out of, but he's helped us to understand it better and to try to get it out when it's most effective, which seems to be in the fall, when it's reproductive and it can spread better on the Canada thistle. So we're trying to get more out to people. And this one is able to kill the plant once it infects the plant. So if you can get the infection started with this fungus, it will result in plant death. So it's a good one if you can get it going. That seems to be the tricky part with this particular agent. It's hard to get started. But here you can see the spread of the infection as the fungus develops through time in the tissue of the Canada thistle. And here's just a look at her plots that she's been measuring. Karen Rosen works on this project, and she's been setting up transects since 2014. And she has even more than 150 at this point. So a good look at how well it's worked, which it seems like it's taken a minimum of 3 years, like a lot of the biocontrols. And after 3 years post-establishment, she has measured a reduction by about half. So that's pretty good. And there's just a look at her monitoring. There's her email if you ever need to get a hold of her. And Toadflax, I know I'm like running out of time a little bit, so I'll just say real quickly, Toadflax.
You're fine on time.
Am I okay? Okay, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, you can go till 4 because we put.
Oh,
so you're fine.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Bonnie. Then I can slow down. Okay. So the toadflaxes are higher elevation weeds. So this is where I think my segment comes into the forestry section a little better, because these are your higher elevation noxious weeds, and we work with these a lot in eastern Colorado. We work with yellow and Dalmatian toadflax, and let's see, I'm going to talk about weevils that attack these, and we actually have a weevil per toadflax species. So the weevils are differentiated by their size. The smaller of the weevils will work best on yellow toadflax, and the slightly larger weevil works on Dalmatian. But both live in the stem of the plants as larvae, and that's where they produce damage to the plant and reduce its vigor, and can eventually kill individual plants by just nestling in the stem and eating up the plant's supply of nutrients there. You can see the adults are boring out of those stems after development. And let's see, here is a look at the sites in Colorado. And so there's a pretty good spread of sites at this point. This is the janthinus weevil. So these are the yellow toadflax weevil sites. And I will mention they haven't been working as well as the Dalmatian toadflax weevils, we're having a harder time getting them established and setting up nurseries to get enough to spread them more. So unfortunately, we just have a really limited supply of these to get to any interested parties. We work with anyone in the state. We work with a lot of weed managers. We work with BLM. We work with just private individuals just call up and would like to try them. So we wish we could get more because we just really have more demand than we have weevils at this point. But hopefully that will improve. And Dalmatian toadflax weevils, again, are the preferred weevil. So you're in better shape if you have the Dalmatian toadflax if you want to use a biocontrol, because these do work really well and we can get plenty. So if you have an area you want to release these weevils, I think you'll see good results. They also bore through the stem, but they've been really shown to, again, really reduce populations of Dalmatian toadflax significantly. So they seem to work pretty well. So I really recommend them. And just to show you an example of how well they can do, the CDA in congruence with, it was with the Forest Service and our state weed coordinator, Steve Ryder, and I think a couple of other entities, the APHIS, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, they all worked in unison to set up sites for the insectary to release these weevils following the Hewlett and High Park fires back in 2012. So it was a big group effort to set aside an area to try the weevils and to get them going after the huge boom of toadflax following those fires. So in 2013, around 6,000 the janthiniformis weevils were released at 20 different sites. And in 2014, a follow-up release was made with 2,000 more. And so at that point, they had 27 sites encompassing about I think 300 acres. Yeah, that sounds like a lot, but I believe that's correct. And here's just a look at those. The monitoring sites are in yellow and the release sites are in red. So that's all the places in that area by the semen reservoir where the weevils were released. So what was the result of all this? Well, here's a really cool visual, because a lot of times that's that's the thing you need to show how well these are actually working. You can get all the numbers and plots made up that you like, but it really is nice to have a good visual representation via photo. And we were very proud of how well these did there and helped. And we saw actually a lot of beneficial grasses come in. And so I need to update this PowerPoint and add in what it looks like currently for sure, because now it's been a while. But after several years, we really did see good success with the weevils in this burned on this burned land that was invaded by the toadflax. So good result there. And if you have any questions about these weevils or puncture vine weevils, Mike Reset would be the one to talk to. So that's his email below. And next up, Leafy Spurge. So Leafy Spurge is another higher elevation weed. This one oftentimes is really vigorous also in disturbed higher elevation areas, and also really noxious like a lot of the other weeds. It causes irritation in the digestive tract of cattle, and just definitely not preferred plant to have in the ecosystem. So best if you can get it out some way with some tactic, whether it is spraying or physical removal, or in this case, we are using a flea beetle, and there are actually several of the flea beetle species. I think there have been 5 that have been keyed out that attack the leafy spurge, and these have also proven to work really well. So these weevils, they're defoliators. They eat the entire plant, and they are helpful. So in cases where you can't get at it other ways, I do recommend these. And leafy spurge also has another beetle that will attack it besides the 5 species of flea beetle. There is a longhorn beetle. It's a little more showy. Most of our biocontrols aren't that beautiful or even too maybe interesting to look at. But these longhorn beetles on the bottom right are really cool looking, and they're the caterpillar form. It looks really cool. So that's kind of interesting. We don't find as many of these, so we mostly do use the flea beetles to help with the leafy spurge. But here's a really nice visual, another visual to show you a release that was done near Meeker, Colorado. And this is one of those cases where it seemed too good to be true, but I think it was just the magnitude of beetles they released there in the first year that really did push it back in a year. So by the next season, you can see a difference already. And through time, these will continue to help. They're cyclic like all these biocontrols. They'll have bad years. They won't help as much. The weed will get stronger, but they generally stay in the system and come back in larger numbers through time. But sometimes it does help to reapply. So some of these you probably would need to reapply the insect out there just to jumpstart the populations again. I also should get a more current photo to see what does this look like now. And I think I kind of zoomed through those, no pun intended. I really zoomed through this beginning slide. So now I'm approaching the end of the show here, but this is a slide to show you the price fee. And these are relatively inexpensive. Like, that is the beauty of biocontrol. It's cheap. And so if you can get them going, they are really cost effective. But again, they're not always the best tool. It really just depends on a case by case basis. But sometimes you really get lucky and they're great. So this is just a lineup of how much the releases cost. This is per release, so sometimes you need to purchase, of course, more than just one. But anyone can do this. You can go online. We have a decent website where you can request a bug, and that's what you do to get on the list. And we just work down these lists in consecutive order. So if it's kind of first come, first serve basis, and we hope to get enough out to everyone every year, but it depends on which one you're looking for, because a lot of times we just don't have enough to go around, unfortunately. We do work our best to get those out and work with everyone we can. And we've worked a lot with Bonnie, so thank you, Bonnie, for supporting us. And if you need more information, definitely check out our website, or you can call the insectary anytime. Well, Monday through Friday, roughly 9 to 5. So yeah, I think that kind of finishes up my talk.
Do you guys have any questions? Any bug questions? Ooh, Don Wilson, hang on. Going to the back.
Okay, cool.
Wondering, there's a place out here north of our town where they released the fungus for Canada thistle, and it's been there for 3 or 4 years. And I noticed this year they disced through it. They pulled up the stakes and disced through it, and they don't seem to be coming back very well. You got any thoughts on that?
Did you hear his question, Nina?
I'm not. I didn't quite hear the end. Yeah. Can you recap that?
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, out here north of town, there's a place where they released the fungus or the
Okay.
Canada thistle.
Yeah.
Been there for 2 or 3 years, and I noticed this year they pulled the stakes up and dished through it, and was just wondering what your thoughts on that were.
That could be one of those cases where they didn't see the results that they were after, which we completely understand. In several years, if you're not seeing establishment, you're not seeing a decrease, then you probably want to go another route. So my best guess is that they decided to just disc it, and I hope if the best case scenario would be that the fungus is there, and if you disc it, that won't hurt the fungus at all. It'll maintain and still help to control it, but you don't generally eradicate it ever. So that could have been one of those situations where they're like, oh, we need to try some other tactics. But I hope that the fungus took. I do know that it is harder to get it to establish in drier zones. Of course, it's a fungus. It loves humidity. And I think a lot of times it needs the right dew point to germinate just to start it. So even if it can work okay in drier zones, just to get it started is really an issue to get that dew point to germinate it. So I don't know the status of that site in particular. Karen Rosen would, but yeah, that's my best guess.
Well, I just thought it was interesting because I spray by it 3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah.
And I watched it over the years, and it went from being this great big huge patch to about half before they dished it under. And I was just wondering how it affected the fungus.
When it establishes, she has measured an average decline of roughly 50% in 3 years. So if it takes and it works and spreads through the Canada thistle, I think that's the average dieback you do see is around 50%. So I hope that's what may have happened, but not sure.
Any more bug questions? Fungus? No, I think we're good. Thank you so much, Nina.
Thanks so much, Bonnie. Thank you all.